You all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
Take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in Dharma.
Take refuge in Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in Dharma.
Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down.
All right, good evening, everybody. Good to see you all here. Thanks for being here. Hope you're all doing well. Yeah. Usually when I sit down here, I wait for something to kind of pop into my head of what I'm going to say. Because usually when I sit down here, whatever I'm going to say comes to me immediately. And tonight I got nothing. So I don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing, but there's just nothing. There's nothing there. So welcome. Don't be shy. You can, the back row, you get to fall asleep. Front row, you have to stay awake. It's up to you. So, it's, anyone here for the first time? What brings you here?
Suggested by friends to find some peace in everyday life.
And they thought coming here would give you peace in everyday life?
Yeah.
Crazy friends.
And now they're downstairs being crazy.
Oh, okay. Well, at least they came here as well. They didn't just ship you off here and stay home and watch TV. Yeah. So you're telling me you currently don't have peace in your everyday life?
Wow, that's a big question. Do we ever have enough?
That wasn't my question. I mean, you're welcome to lead, and then you can sit here, and then I would gladly trade places with you. So are you saying you don't have peace in your everyday life?
Some days it's harder than others.
Yeah. That's a more like real, genuine response, That's a big part of this practice is to honestly ask ourselves, wow, what's really happening? What am I really sitting with? Yeah. And some days it is definitely harder than others. Absolutely. So, and what's your name?
Carlos.
Carlos. Glad you're here, Carlos.
Thank you.
Welcome. Who else? I saw somebody else here for the first time. What brings you here? Kind of already know the answer to this, but sure.
Oh, my friend invited me, and I thought this would be a good place to come.
Yes. Funny how friends bring you to places like this,
Yeah.
Was there heavy bribery taking place, or was it pretty?
No bribery at all. I just wanted to meet her in person.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm glad you're here.
I am too.
It's a challenge, going back to kind of Carlos's earlier comments, every day there's so many difficulties that we face. And some days there are, without a doubt, more challenges than others. And really this practice is just kind of being with these challenges as they arise. and doing our best to not let it influence us to too much of an extreme, really, because that's what tends to happen when we have conflict and difficulties in our lives. We kind of find these extremes to settle into, and this practice is really just kind of learning to be with things as they are. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with the meditation practice. To our millions of YouTube followers, welcome. Good to see you all here. Feel free to say hello, introduce yourselves, and chime in somewhere in the chat box on your screen. So we'll start with the meditation. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice. Meaning, don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often it helps slide into the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. If you're on a bench or a chair, however you're sitting, same thing, trying to relax the shoulders. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap. If you need to move during meditation, simply move. Movement doesn't mean you're a bad meditator. It just means your leg hurts or you have an itch. So just gently move and then return to stillness. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed, if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever's comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return to breath. Breathing in. Follow breath in. Breathing out. Follow breath out. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from the practice. Just sitting. Breathing. keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. The most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourself how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit, hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us. He began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your entire life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. More reactions. That's it. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your days. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, peaceful, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape as often people think it is. It's direct perception into the present moment. And not labeling that present moment, but simply being with the present moment. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody else you encounter every moment of your life. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us, hoping they do this, hoping they do that, wishing they would do this, wishing they would do that, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets simpler. But that's why we call it a practice. It's something we work on day in and day out. It never changes. Meaning the opportunity to practice never changes. Somebody asked a question earlier that I wanted to take a few moments here and just kind of respond to. And the question was around, why are we always in such a rush to get to the next thing, to get away from suffering, to get to whatever is better on the other side? And there's a great book called Crooked Cucumber. It's about the life of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who built the San Francisco Zen Center, written by David Chadwick. And it's a great book about the story of his life, growing up as a young, ordained at 12 years old as a novice monk, and growing up in Japan, and then later in his life, when he was probably in his 50s, somewhere there, sent to San Francisco in the late 50s, early 60s to build the San Francisco Zen Center, just to give it some context. So he built Buddhism in San Francisco in the 60s. What a phenomenal time and experience, right? Quite jealous, actually, but nothing I can do about that now. And there's a quote or a story in the book, and I'll paraphrase it to hopefully make sense, but it's a master and disciple, and they're walking in the rain. And the disciple is like in a rush to get out of the rain. And the master says, "What's your hurry? The rain is everywhere." And this is such an incredible opportunity to remind us of a couple things. One, that when we're in the rain, and the rain is a metaphor for life, why the hurry to get out of it? But to take it, for me at least, the way I interpret that is that we immediately would think that the rain is bad. So we're rushing to get out of it, to get to something good. But for me, when the master says, what's the hurry to get out of the rain? Ultimately, Buddhist teachings are beyond labeling things as good or bad. And I get it, especially if you're brand new to Buddhism. I'm not suggesting that there are things in this world that we're ever going to see not good or not bad. So I just want to throw that out there, especially for those who might be brand new. I don't want you walking out here saying, well, that Buddhist guy said there's nothing bad, right? Murder, rape, there are so many things we all would agree upon are bad. And there's so many things we all would agree upon are good. And then there's things that are kind of in this middle gray area that are really left to interpretation. And for me, what the Buddha was teaching was not about labeling things as good or bad, but recognizing the causes and conditions that create each moment and being with them as they arise. So this idea that when it's raining, we think, well, rain is bad, I have to get out of it. But who here loves the rain? I mean, I do. But anyone else love the rain? So like if it's raining and you love the rain, why would you be in a hurry to get out of it? So that's the first thing with this example of the master saying to the disciple, what's your hurry? The rain is everywhere. It's not labeling the rain as good or bad, just experiencing and being with the rain, good or bad, or as the Buddha taught, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, to recognize the feelings, the sensations that arise in that moment. But beyond that, back to really kind of the original question and thing to explore is take about 5 seconds, because it usually doesn't take much longer than that, and ask yourself, what is it or what was it today that you were in that you couldn't wait for it to be over? You couldn't wait for it to end. You couldn't wait for it to be done. You couldn't wait for you to be gone. Something in your life today where you were just over it. Everybody got that thing? Usually doesn't take that long. That's the sad part, actually. Is it usually doesn't take too long to think about that. But we don't have enough time to get into all that stuff. And then recognize that what you're experiencing in that moment is what the Buddha taught is the root cause of all of our suffering, which is craving and desire. When we hear the words craving and desire, it can mean many things, obviously, to different people, however we interpret that word craving and desire. But very often, the words cravings or the word desires tend to kind of have this heavy meaning to it. Craving and desire sound so strong. But in a very subtle way, we spend our entire day craving and desiring things to be different. I don't like the temperature. I don't like the song that's on the radio or the commercial that's on TV. I don't like the way my sandwich was prepared. Whatever it might be, there's a constant awareness that is required to recognize throughout our day how much we crave and desire to move away from present moment. And as long as we are doing that, it could be simple things like I just listed. Or it could be a certain stage of your life and you want to move on from that because you think the next stage of your life is going to be better. Well, I'll tell you what, you're all in right now, that next stage of your life that you thought could be better. How are you feeling about that? And then there's going to be a next stage and a next stage and a next stage. And we're constantly thinking that something is going to be better. Because we've been conditioned that way since birth. The Buddha taught a lot about causes and conditions. And this dynamic that occurs that our entire lives, everyone around us, is telling us to be better. We're born and, as little babies, we're just laying there in our cribs and all of a sudden we turn over and then parental figures are thrilled because we turned over. but that's not enough. Then we have to pull ourselves up, and then we pull ourselves up on the crib or the table or whatever it is, and then that's not enough because we have to be able to stand without falling over. And then that's not enough because we have to be able to walk. And then that's not enough because we have to be able to run. And then school starts. And it's this never-ending system and cycle of others pushing us to want more. And I'm not suggesting that we just like look at little babies and leave them alone. What I want us to understand is why this condition is in us. Why, before we even know it, we are so conditioned that whatever we're doing is not enough. It's that kind of expression I say jokingly of, it's not your fault, you're not alone. We have all been taught since birth to seek, crave, and desire more. And next thing you know, you wake up one day, you're 40 years old, and you're like, oh my God, I'm miserable. Why? Because you've spent forever craving and desiring more. And you're never okay with how things are. And that's where I default back to, and that's why for me, bringing up that example of the rain is important. The rain is how things are. So it's not about changing the rain to the sun. Some people don't like the sun. No difference between the sun or the rain. That is what the Buddha refers to as the dualistic mind that creates labels around situations and then chooses if we like them or dislike them. And what the Buddha's teaching is be with the experience, be with the sun, be with the rain, be with the clouds. I'm out of weather examples, but so cut through craving, cut through desire, and ultimately, and I'll close with this thought, we'll open up to questions, learn to settle, ideally, as a practice, into a place of gratitude. Whether it's raining or not. Be grateful for each experience in your life because it means you're alive. And being alive is a beautiful thing because there's incredible beauty to experience and enjoy. And if for some reason our lives just stick in all the misery. And these labels and perceptions, like I just said, misery, joy, these are important on a very practical sense. But ultimately, we work on those labels falling away and just being grateful. So with that, I'll pause and really just want to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that you're sitting with, and we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening for questions. And again, same for those of you joining online virtually. Welcome. Feel free to, the chat box is there. Feel free to type something in, and I'll do my best to address your questions as well. So thoughts, questions? Yeah, Carlos.
What part does the iconography or ideology take place? Or what part does it have in the daily practice?
Yeah. So the question for those who maybe didn't hear it is, and it's interesting your choice of words, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going to paraphrase it for our millions of followers. What part, the first thing you said was what part does the iconography have? And then you said ideology have, right? So you kind of, and those are two completely different things, the way I understand them, yeah? The way I understand that question is, the initial question is, what does it all mean? What is the iconography? What do they represent? And then the second question, and I could be reading into this too much, to me sounds like it's coming from this place of, what are you worshiping? What are you praying to? What are your gods? Is that a fair guess at those two?
Well, I believe I used the second word based on my own experiences growing up.
Yes, exactly. So perfect. So thank you. So especially for those who are brand new to this stuff, you look up and you see these images and you're like, what is all that? Right? Let me back up for a minute just to clarify some things before I talk about specific meanings. And so you're aware, anybody else who might be new, Buddha was not a god. Right? You aware of that part? That he was the prince, he was just some dude living in India 500 years before Christ. Okay. And so one thing that's always really important around this topic is for everyone to understand that there were 12 or 14 questions the Buddha was asked that he would not answer. And one of the questions they asked him was, should we believe in God and goddesses? Now, it's important to understand that Buddha was Hindu, right? Buddhism didn't exist at that time. He was just some kid growing up with the Hindu faith, Hindu religion, Hindu way of life. And there was a belief in the gods and goddesses, right? Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Parvati, all the gods and goddesses were out there. That's what they grew up believing in. And when he began to teach, and they would come to him, and this is, 35, 29, he leaves home, roams the base of the Himalayan mountains for 6 years. 35, he sits under the Bodhi tree, he says, I'm not moving until I figure out why we suffer. This is the very short story of his life. And then for 21 days, he sat and he didn't move. He realized the nature of suffering was in his own mind. And then for 45 years, he taught, and he died at 80. And during this time of teaching, again, back to my comment earlier, they asked him, should we believe in gods and goddesses? And he said, I'm just a human. I cannot tell you what to believe in. That's up to you. And for me, that teaching is really important, especially for folks in a Western culture who, many of which do not grow up Buddhist. You grow up Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, pagan, or lack thereof. And all of a sudden, there's this Buddhist stuff. And people often refer to it as a philosophy and way of life, which it is. And people often refer to it as a religious belief and practice, which it is. It is both. Ultimately, how you perceive it, and I'll get to the statues in a minute, but this is really the heart of what's behind the statues. Ultimately, whether you believe it to be a philosophy and a way of life, which is what a lot of Western people do, because a lot of Western people come to Buddhism are like, well, I'm anti-religion, I don't like religion, I'm done with it, whatever. So like, well, I'll go to Buddhism because it's a philosophy and way of life. Well, if you walk into a temple in Thailand right now, you walk into a temple in Taiwan, somewhere like that, and you tell them that's a philosophy or way of life, it's kind of insulting to them. It'd be like walking into the Catholic Church across the street and saying this isn't a religion. So for many people all over the world, it's one of the world's oldest, largest religions. And practice very faith-based, very devout. And in that, you have all kinds of statues and rituals. Before I get to that, Dalai Lama was asked one time years ago, he was talking about this culture. And somebody said, does the Western culture need more Buddhists? And he said, the world has enough Buddhists. We're good. Actually, he didn't say we're good. I'm adding that part. But he said the world has enough Buddhists. This country just needs more people who are peaceful and happy. It was your first answer when I asked you why you're here, looking for more peace. That's what Buddhism is about. Now, you with me so far? Coming to the statues, it's also important to understand that the Buddha was very clear during his life. He never wanted statues made. People didn't listen so much to that part. Right? You got 2,000 years of statues being made. Because shortly after he died, at some point in time over this first 100 years or whatever it was, and I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but at some point in time they said, we want an image of the Buddha to show the physical presence. So the very first image they ever made of the Buddha was footprints to show that the Buddha's teachings will travel. From there, statues came about. And you have 2,500 years of different cultures making different statues in different styles and looks. And each one of them has a different meaning, right? This big one in the middle, that's Kuan Yin. She's what we call a Bodhisattva. These are actually all three Bodhisattvas, the three larger ones that were gifted about 4 years ago here. Those are Bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are, literal translation is enlightened being. But these are people who vow to be reborn. And if you're not into rebirth, just think about wake up. These are people who vow to wake up every single day, no pun intended, to help free all people from their own suffering. That is their vow. To not enter into nirvana, to some, a freedom from their own suffering, until all people have ended their suffering. Right? And so the middle one is Kuan Yin. Her name is translated as hearer of the world's cries. So she hears all the suffering in the world and then pours out compassion to heal. This is Samantabhadra, represents great diligence, great practice. He has 6 tusks, which represent the 6 paramitas. The paramitas is the Bodhisattva teaching of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. It's a very deep meaning. And this is Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of great wisdom. The metaphor here is that's a crazy wild lion. You ever been in a cage with a crazy lion? Have you really? No. It's like, once in a while somebody actually has, so you never know. But imagine being in a cage with a lion. That's what it's like living with our own thoughts. And taming that lion, like taming our thoughts, is not easy. But here is Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. That's the type of wisdom that's required to turn a crazy lion into a playful little happy lion. So, endless statues, endless meanings, endless Buddhas, endless Bodhisattvas. Does that help a little bit? Get you started? Yeah. Google Buddhist iconography. And, so, yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I just have a question about the Buddhist.
Yeah.
What is the one that looks like an elephant?
So that is Ganesh or Ganesha. It's a Hindu god. He is the destroyer of all obstacles. This is a good one to have. Yeah. And interestingly enough, when we're done, you can come up and take a look. So the shrine here, as in the nature of the Dharma Bum temples, we're not one specific school of Buddhism or one specific lineage of Buddhism. We share and practice all the different schools of Buddhism for the most part, especially the ones that aren't, well, let's just say the healthy ones. And even on our shrine, with each statue, you have representations from different cultures and different Buddhist beliefs. And right behind me, you can't see it from there, we have 3 little Ganesh statues. So, big fan of Ganesh. Yeah. The fun thing about, and I love these questions, but the fun thing, especially for those who are new to Buddhism, is at the beginning, it's kind of like this, what is all this stuff? It's like when you go to a restaurant for the first time, you haven't even eaten yet. You don't have the food. But you spend the first X amount of minutes talking to the people who are there. Look, anyone like to people watch? Right? You're sitting there looking around at all the other people. What are they wearing? What are they eating? What are they talking about? Right? So we're kind of lost in this environment of the people. And then there's the menu, and then you have to explore it. And then you spend all this time before you actually get to eat. And when you eat, very rarely are you even just eating. Then you're eating, talking about, is it good? Is it not good? Do I like it? Do I not like it? What are you eating? What are they eating? Buddhist practice is setting all of that aside and going inward. It's like holding up a mirror and asking ourselves, why do I suffer? Why do I get sad? Why do I get angry? Why do I get depressed? And all of these things are just kind of things that are pointing you to hopefully eventually sit down and recognize, what's the nature of my mind? What's the nature of my heart? Why do I get lost in all the stuff? And at what point in time can I sit down quietly and reflect on my own heart, my own mind? That's the hard part. Because when you sit quietly with yourself, what are you left with? Not a trick question. When you sit quietly with yourself, what are you left with? your mind, your thoughts, yourself. And what are we often trying to run away from? To all the stuff. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions?
I know you mentioned Buddha considered himself a human, everyone who was human, but is he considered a guru or mediator?
Sure. So the question was that how, and I'll paraphrase it again for those virtually, but how I referred to the Buddha and said he wasn't a god, or he referred to himself as not a god. But your question was he considered a guru or a mediator, right? So interestingly enough, even when he became called the Buddha, right? So right above that exit sign, I always reference this, but that tapestry up there is him giving what's called the first turning of the Dharma wheel at Deer Park, where he first taught the Four Noble Truths, the core basic teachings of the Buddha. Life is suffering, the first one. The second is the cause, greed, anger, ignorance. The third is the ending, nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. And the fourth is the path, and this is the Eightfold Path, right? Correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration, all this stuff on Google for free. And you can look at it, right? And so your question of, what was he? Was he a guru? Was he a teacher? What was he, right? So at that moment, when they sat with him, those are the 5 guys that he was traveling with as yogis, as practitioners, as ascetics, and they left him because he decided to eat and, again, this is another story, but regain physical health and find a balance in his life. And they said, there's Siddhartha Gautama. Let's go sit with him. It looks like he's figured something out. And as he taught, they said, you have awakened. We will call you the Buddha. So they called him Buddha. That just means the awakened one. That was a name. He had many names. Tathagata, which means suchness. So they referred to him in many different ways. Many people still called him my Lord because he was a prince. He was the prince to many. People saw him as a teacher. People saw him as a guru. People saw him as a master, right? The funny thing is, years ago when Temple was downtown, this is probably maybe 10 years ago, I remember there was a Zen priest. She came in to teach, one of the greatest teachers I've ever seen. And I was talking to her afterwards, and it was around, without getting too far into it, it was around this idea of what makes somebody a teacher, right? Because, again, it's too late to get into this whole long thing, but I'm just not a big fan of this Western culture of like somebody does 100 hours of something and all of a sudden they're like given some master certificate. No offense to anyone who's done that. But Buddhism is not that. And, you know, in the tradition I come from, you spend 20, 30 years before you're even considered anything ready to teach anyone. So I take lineage and tradition and teaching very seriously, which is why we always say we're not teachers. So I was talking to her about this, and her response to me was, she said, Jeff, whatever you call yourself or refer to yourself doesn't matter. People will decide in their own mind what you are. And it was and then we went on to talk about the life of the Buddha and things like that, but it was such a beautiful reminder to me that, which is what made me think of this, that as the Buddha was teaching, they all would have seen him in different light, in different ways, and called him different things. But ultimately, what you call someone or what you refer to someone is not what's important. What's important is when you sit with people, when you learn from people, what does it do to you? And the Western world has done, and I'll close with this thought, has done a phenomenal job at completely ruining this master-disciple, teacher-student relationship. Because Western culture within meditation, Buddhism, yoga, has turned it into a business. A very unhealthy, toxic one. And it's created incredible, unhealthy, toxic dynamic in relationships. which the teacher, as they would be referred to, or the guru or the master, whatever you want to call them in that situation, they're not ready for it. Do you know how hard it is on somebody's ego to have people look at them as if they know everything? And how easy it is to assign a dollar sign to that and say, here, give me $50 because then we can have a teacher-student relationship. What you're now working this kind of Western way into is therapy and counseling. And so Buddhism, spiritual practice in the West, uses kind of this therapy counseling model as if I'm going to heal you, so you should pay for that. Buddha was very clear. Not a business. Not about money. He even taught the monks and nuns, he said, you do not teach the beauty and the practice of generosity, which is the root cause of our suffering, greed. So the noble truths. First one is greed. It's why we suffer. And the Buddha taught we overcome greed with generosity. Generosity in this culture gets, in Buddhism, almost always is considered money. We even have a word we've given it to ruin it, which is dana, which is a Sanskrit word which means generosity. And people translate that word to donation. In Buddhism, people say, they give a talk and then they say, now here's your chance to practice dana. Dana is generosity. It's not money. Dana is not donations. You go to these fancy retreat places, you spend $2,000, and then at the end, somebody gets up there and after they've opened up your heart, they say, thank you for coming. Such a wonderful practice, a wonderful opportunity for you all to sit here and spend $3,000. And now you have an even greater opportunity to practice dana and give money for the teacher. And they've taken the most precious, beautiful teaching of the Buddha around generosity and ruined it. By they, I mean Western Buddhists. And I'm very blatantly, openly, honestly attacking the way Western folks use this teaching, because it just, I find it really disgusting that it's the cause of our suffering, and we've ruined it in Buddhist Western worlds, right? There's so many things you can give. Give people a heart, your heart. Give them a smile. Give them a hug. Give them attention. Give them your ear to listen to. Give them space. So many things and ways to practice generosity and giving. So, as always, I ramble, and somewhere in there, hopefully I answered your question. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Any final thoughts, questions? Oh, to the question, Saturday morning, we will have meditation. There's a question here about Saturday. Anything else before we close? Last thought I have is the greatest thing the Buddha taught that you can give is the Dharma. The greatest form of generosity is to give the Dharma. And I don't mean by like reciting the Four Noble Truths to somebody. Giving people the practice of the Buddha's teachings, putting that practice into your life, and giving that to others, that kindness, that compassion, that forgiveness, that understanding, the patience, giving that to people is the greatest gift, according to the Buddha's teachings. So, we'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace and free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to more than 6 million lives that have been lost during this pandemic, and their family and friends who continue to suffer to this day. May they all be at peace. May we all be at peace and free from suffering. So before y'all head out, Cliff, you want to come on up? We have just a few announcements before y'all scatter. Thank you, Cliff.
Hello, everyone. Tonight's host, hello, everyone. I'm tonight's host, Cliff. We opened the Dharma Temple 15 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice with others. Just about every night, we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone battling addictions, a family sangha for parents, kids, toddlers, and teens, which currently meets once a month. And we also offer a half-day silent retreat first Saturday of the month with an RSVP required. Everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We also have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you're done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. Thank you for being here, and we really wish you well and hope to see you all again.
Thanks, Cliff. Thank y'all.